Imagine a world teetering on the brink. It's the summer of 1914 and Europe is a web of alliances, ambitions, and simmering tensions. This wasn't a world that stumbled into war by accident. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. And that spark came on June 28th in the city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie are visiting. Suddenly, a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip steps from the crowd. Shots ring out, and the future of an empire, and the world is changed forever. Austria-Hungary, outraged, issues a harsh ultimatum to Serbia, blaming them for the assassination. Serbia agrees to most of the demands, but not all. It's not enough. On July 28th, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. What started as a regional crisis was about to go global. This is where the tangled web of alliances comes into play. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic Serbs, begins to mobilize its massive army. This alarms Germany, Austria-Hungary's powerful ally. Germany issues its own ultimatum. Russia must stand down. Russia refuses. On August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. The dominoes were now falling at a terrifying speed. Germany knew that a war with Russia also meant war with Russia's ally, France. To avoid a two-front war, Germany enacted the Schlieffen Plan. The idea was to launch a lightning-fast invasion of France through neutral Belgium, knock them out of the war quickly, and then turn their full attention to Russia in the east. So on August 3rd, Germany declares war on France. The next day, German troops storm across the Belgian border. This act, the invasion of a neutral country, horrifies Great Britain. Britain had a treaty to protect Belgium's neutrality. They issue an ultimatum to Germany: withdraw your troops. Germany ignores it. Britain declares war. Within a week, the great powers of Europe were locked in a conflict that would become known as the Great War. On the Western Front, the initial German advance was brutal and swift. They pushed through Belgium and into northern France, driving ever closer to Paris. The French and British forces were in a desperate retreat. It looked as though the Schlieffen Plan might actually work. But then came the miracle. At the First Battle of the Marne in early September 1914, the exhausted Allied armies rallied. In a desperate counterattack, they managed to halt the German advance just miles from the capital. The dream of a quick victory was shattered. What followed was the race to the sea, as both sides tried to outflank each other, extending their battle lines all the way to the North Sea coast. As winter set in, the soldiers dug in. They dug trenches reinforced with barbed wire and sandbags, creating a vast, muddy, and deadly network of fortifications that would stretch for 475 miles. This was the birth of trench warfare. The land between the opposing trenches became known as no man's land, a desolate, crater-pocked wasteland of mud, barbed wire, and the constant threat of death from machine guns and artillery. For the next 4 years, millions of men would live, fight, and die in these horrifying conditions. Life in the trenches was a nightmare. Soldiers battled not just the enemy, but also disease, cold, mud, and infestations of rats and lice. The constant stress of artillery bombardments, known as shell shock, what we now call PTSD, took a terrible toll on their mental health. Generals struggling to understand this new form of warfare repeatedly ordered massive frontal assaults. They believed that by throwing enough men over the top, they could break through the enemy lines. Battles like Verdun and the Somme in 1916 became infamous for their staggering casualties. At the Somme, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, including almost 20,000 killed on the very first day of the attack. These battles gained mere miles of territory at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. While the Western Front was locked in a brutal stalemate, the war was raging elsewhere too. On the Eastern Front, the vast armies of Germany and Austria-Hungary clashed with Russia. The fighting here was more mobile, but no less deadly. Russia, despite its huge numbers, was poorly equipped and suffered devastating losses, leading to growing unrest back home. The war also spread to the Middle East, Africa, and Asia as the European colonial powers battled over their empires. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers. opening up new fronts in the Caucasus and the Middle East, including the disastrous Gallipoli campaign where Allied forces tried and failed to seize the Dardanelles Strait. Back at sea, the British Royal Navy imposed a naval blockade on Germany, slowly strangling its economy and ability to import food and raw materials. In response, Germany unleashed a new and terrifying weapon, the U-boat or submarine. They began a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking any ship, including civilian vessels, that entered the waters around Britain. It was this policy that would ultimately draw the United States into the war. In May 1915, a German U-boat sank the British passenger liner the Lusitania, killing nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. Public opinion in the US turned sharply against Germany. For a time, Germany scaled back its submarine campaign to keep America neutral. But by early 1917, they were desperate. They gambled that they could starve Britain into submission before the US could mobilize and send troops to Europe. They resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. This combined with the discovery of the Zimmermann telegram, a secret German proposal for an alliance with Mexico against the US, was the final straw. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. The year 1917 was a turning point. While the US was entering the war, Russia was leaving it. The immense strain of the war had led to the collapse of the Russian monarchy. After two revolutions, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power. They promised peace, land, and bread, and quickly signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in March 1918, ending Russia's involvement in the war. This was a huge boost for Germany. They could now transfer hundreds of thousands of troops from the Eastern Front to the West. In the spring of 1918, they launched a massive final offensive, the Kaiserschlacht or Emperor's Battle. Using new stormtrooper tactics, they smashed through the Allied lines, creating the biggest advances seen on the Western Front in years. It was a desperate last-ditch effort to win the war before the American forces arrived in overwhelming numbers. The spring offensive came perilously close to succeeding. But the German army was exhausted, their supply lines were stretched thin, and they had suffered immense casualties. And then the Americans arrived. Fresh, well-equipped and enthusiastic, the American doughboys helped to plug the gaps and turn the tide. Starting in the summer of 1918, the Allies, now reinforced and using coordinated attacks with tanks, aircraft and infantry, launched their own counteroffensive. Known as the 100 Days Offensive, this relentless assault systematically broke the back of the German army. One by one, Germany's allies Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary collapsed and sued for peace. Back in Germany, the situation was dire. The naval blockade had caused widespread starvation. The people were weary of war and revolution was in the air. The German military leadership finally admitted to the Kaiser that the war was lost. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and fled to the Netherlands. A new German republic was declared. 2 days later, in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, France, a German delegation signed an armistice agreement with the Allies. At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. The Great War was over. It had left a scar across the globe. Over 16 million people, both soldiers and civilians, were dead. Entire empires had vanished. The political map of Europe was redrawn. The aftermath of the war was shaped by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The treaty imposed harsh terms on Germany, forcing it to accept full blame for the war, pay crippling reparations, and severely limit its military. While intended to ensure peace, many historians argue its punitive nature sowed the seeds for future conflict, contributing to the rise of extremism in Germany and ultimately the Second World War just 2 decades later. World War I was a cataclysm that shattered old worlds and created a new, more uncertain one. It accelerated technological, social, and political change on a scale never seen before. It was the war to end all wars, but its legacy proved to be far more complex and enduring, shaping the very world we live in today. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey through history interesting, please hit that like button. And consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'll see you in the next one.